What's up, everyone? Chris Yandel here for Channelfireball.com, and welcome to another edition of Audio Articles, where we bring you articles written by the top Magic the Gathering pros in audio form so you can listen on the go wherever and whenever you want for free. We've got a lot of really great content on YouTube, so make sure you head over to YouTube and click on that subscribe button, turn on the notifications so you can see all the videos that our pros are making just for you. We're always trying to make your listening experience easier, so if you have an iPhone, ask Siri to play the most recent episode of Channel Fireball's podcast, and you're all set. Today's episode is written by Brian Demars, and he's going to talk about how being a specialist now might be the time to shine. Thanks for tuning in today, and here is There's Never Been a Better Time to Be a Specialist by Brian Demars. Magic is a huge game with endless ways to play and tens of thousands of individual game pieces. There's so many different formats and decks that there's not enough hours in the day to play them all. Luckily, we don't have to play everything in order to be competitive and make the most out of each tournament opportunity. Instead of looking at the big picture, it makes a lot of sense to narrow your focus and specialize in one skill set. Over the winter, I decided that I wanted to get into Pauper, and I had a strategy to do it. Every time I played, I selected a different deck until I had sampled the format from many angles. While I think that was a fun and useful way to learn about the format in the abstract, it didn't put me into a position where I ever felt like I was on the cutting edge of the format. I've recently narrowed my focus to just a few decks, and my win percentage and ability to tune my decks have increased as a result. Why specialize? Simply, Magic is too big, and that's a good thing. It means we never get too bored. There's always something else to do or try. There's so much information floating around, and the formats and metagames change so regularly that it's difficult to stay on top of everything and adapt accordingly. I'm not saying to specialize as an excuse not to pay attention in class. The story is so large and complicated that there are advantages to keeping problems digestible. What is your best deck in the format that you play the most? Wouldn't you be better served winning matches playing that deck in that format than something else? I've noticed a trend over the past year or so among the players who regularly attend weekly tournaments at my local game store. In particular, they've gotten good at what they play through tons of practice. The most difficult pairings are those who play the same format and same deck week in and week out. If your goal is to win more at larger events, narrowing your focus may be the best area to invest your energy. Why specialize now? Magic changes consistently, but three trends have emerged over the past few years. Number one, your opponents are better informed. There's more information available than ever. Between coverage, results, and content, the average player knows more information than ever before because that information is more easily disseminated. Why does this make specializing good? In a world where everyone knows more information, it becomes harder to know more or be better than a random opponent. What you can do is know more about playing individual matchups with a specific deck than others, specifically against opponents who are not as specialized with their deck as you are. Number two, metagames change slowly and only slightly. The widely played formats have a tendency to settle into established metagames that don't change too dramatically over long periods of time. Why does this make specializing good? Players don't get punished for sticking with the same deck. Rather, they are rewarded for making minor adaptations with a solid deck to meet the changing field. Especially in formats like Legacy and Modern, where there are dozens of great deck choices, the experience players have with the format and with their deck is often what decides closely contested games. The player who's been grinding their Modern or Legacy weapon on Moto or at their local game store for 7 months has a huge advantage over the player who only has a week's worth of repetitions under their belt. On occasions, a player can get punished for staying the course, like bannings or new printings, but the rewards stack exponentially over time. Standard is different in that it changes more than older formats. But after a week or two, the major players of the format tend to be known commodities: blue-white, black-red, black-green, blue-black, and green-white. We know that standard metagames tend to be cyclical when the format is not oppressed by broken decks that require bannings. Blue-white wrecks an event. Then black-red gets tuned to beat blue-white and wrecks an event. Then whatever beats black-red does well. And then blue-white comes back and beats the deck that beat it 2 weeks ago. As players jump from one deck of the week to the next and build the list that did well the week before, the savvy players are staying one step ahead of the curve in inventing the next level of the metagame in a fairly predictable way. Here's the thing, even when Black-Red has its big weekend and becomes the new deck to beat, there will still be Blue-White and Green-Black in the mix. In particular, it's the specialists with these archetypes that are leading the pack. The key is that even in a week where blue-white is a bad choice, it's always a fine choice as long as the specialist has made adjustments to correctly counteract what is likely to happen next. Formats that change the most reward specialization the least, but even in those scenarios, specialization may still be a better choice for the majority of players than bouncing around, especially for players who don't have the luxury of grinding 30 hours of Magic in a week. Team formats reward specialization. With team events being all the rage this spring, it makes specializing even better since players don't need to practice as many formats in order to prepare for events. Why does this make specializing good? It should be pretty obvious that the best possible team for a constructed trio event is a legacy specialist, a modern specialist, and a standard specialist. Such a configuration is much, much better than 3 modern ringers, etc. The advent of team events makes it a great time to be a specialist, since there's no shortage of events to play. I got to play Legacy in 3 Grand Prix this year, which is more than I've ever played thanks to the team format. Historically, one of the biggest drawbacks of specialization was simply finding events to play. What's the point of being a Delver Legacy specialist when there's only a handful of meaningful events to play in a calendar year? Not much. But putting in those Legacy reps feels like a better use of time when there are Team Trios events all over the board. Team Constructed also rewards specialization by not requiring players to practice formats they are not really into. For instance, Standard is my least favorite format. It's a fine format, and it's gotten much better since Dominaria, but it doesn't excite me. In past team events, I needed to spend time practicing Standard in order to be ready for individual Grand Prix. Now I can just team up with a Standard specialist, let them do their thing, and focus on playing the decks and formats I'm actually interested in. I've had teammates ask me the following question a lot. Should I play X, Y, or Z? My response was always the same. What deck do you have the most experience with? I've played them all a fair amount. Still, which one do you have the most experience with? I had an interesting conversation before the last Grand Prix where my teammate answered that he thought he could play them all well, which was true, and I believed him. My response was, I don't think that you'd make bad plays with any of these decks in games, but when it comes to sideboarding, there's a lot of margin to be gained. There's roughly 40 decks to know how to sideboard against and know how they are going to sideboard against you. Which deck do you have the most experience with? Because I believe that is where the margins are. The slogan for Pokemon is, gotta catch 'em all. But in my experience, catching them all is just a distraction. Basically, there are only a handful of monsters worth leveling up to battle with, and the rest just sit on the bench in the Pokedex and rarely do much good. In competitive Magic, specializing may well be the way of the future. It's good news, since it means that players are incentivized to play their favorite decks and their favorite formats more. That does it for this episode of Audio Articles. Make sure to head over to channelfireball.com and leave Brian a comment about what you thought about today's article. Or you can hit him up on Twitter at Brian Demars1. Also, make sure to check out cfbevents.com. You'll find all the information about the upcoming GPs there. Follow us on Instagram and Twitter, and make sure to subscribe to the YouTube channel. Thanks for joining us today, and I hope to see you soon. And until then, peace.